So, staying ahead of market trends is one of the conversations we're going to explore today with our guest, Annie Dickerson. Annie is the co founder of Good Egg Investments, author and host of the Life and Money Show podcast. And recently, Good Egg Investments was announced as one of the fastest growing private companies in America, earning them a coveted spot on the 2024 Inc. 5000 list. So, Annie, congratulations are in order and welcome.
I'm so excited to be here with your listeners and your viewers and this whole community that you've fostered, Bessie.
Yeah, well, I had the privilege. I'm not sure how long ago it was. Maybe it was probably over a year. Quite a while ago, I was on
Yeah.
your podcast. So it's lovely to be able
Mhm.
to return the favor.
Yeah, absolutely.
To kick us off, I would love to hear from you to just share some of your story around going right back. What motivated you to launch Good Egg Investments, and especially kind of drawing out some of the elements around the fact that you didn't actually have prior experience in real estate syndication. So I'm kind of fascinated. Tell us a little bit about that and what you guys actually do, and the journey to this point. That would be amazing.
Absolutely. Well, there were so many things going against me, and I actively railed against wanting to start a business. I was a teacher first, then went into game design. I had joined many startups and saw how difficult it was to be an entrepreneur, to get a venture off the ground. In fact, one year back when I was working in the startup world, my boss at the time, who owned this small gaming company, he came in at Halloween and he had, one of those plastic like knives that like it looks like it's going through your head. And we
Yes. Yeah.
said, "What are you dressed up as?" And he goes, "An entrepreneur." And I thought, "Oh, heck no, I'm not going there. That seems like a terrible life, so hard, so much work, so much risk. I'm going to just go to the W-2 route and just keep climbing the corporate ladder." And I did for a while. And in fact, when we moved to the Bay Area where we are now, my husband decided out of the blue, he was in tech before, but he decided he was going to get into real estate as a real estate agent. And I thought, all right, well, I'm going to cross that one off my list. We can't both be in real estate. So he's got that one. I'm going to go do something else.
Had to diversify the risk. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't even thinking about doing anything related to real estate or business at the time. I was in instructional design, creating trainings for companies at the time. And what happened was, in the 10 years after college, I had 9 different jobs. I was trying to figure out exactly where I fit, and everywhere I bumped up against things that just weren't quite right, and I wanted to have a deeper impact. And so a couple years into being here in the Bay Area, my husband, whose real estate company was growing, he asked me for help with his business. So I hemmed and I hawed and I said, "Okay, fine. I'll do your website. I'll do your website." And in the process of doing that, I discovered that I loved real estate investing, not what he does, but the investing side. And here's why, is because I had had 9 jobs in 10 years. And I was so tired of going from one job to another, but I didn't see a way out until learned more about real estate investing. And I thought, wait a second. If you're telling me if I just buy X number of houses, each cash flowing this amount every month, I could start to replace my salary. And nobody had ever told me that before. I had never connected the dots. And so when I did, I said, oh, forget your business. I'm going to focus on doing this. And at the time, I didn't think anything about helping other people do it. I was just like, okay, I want to get to this number of rental homes for ourselves. Then selfishly, I can quit my job. I don't ever have to work again. And so that was what I was doing. But as luck would have it, of course, I became obsessed with investing in real estate. So every time we would get together with friends and family, it was all that I could talk about. They'd say, "Annie, what are you up to these days?" I'd say, "Oh my gosh, let me tell you about this new market I found. Let me tell you about these properties I'm looking at." And I was so passionate. People love that passion, right? And so they would say, "Oh my goodness, teach me. I want to learn how to do it too." And so I'd say, pull up a chair, I'll teach you all my secrets. I'm going down the list of all the things they need to do to invest in a rental property. And they're like, oh, no, 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 no,
They
no,
were
no, no.
seeing the
No.
knife
Yeah.
across the head at that moment. Yes,
Yes.
the Halloween.
Yes, exactly. They were like, no, no, I don't want to do the work. You misunderstand. I just have this pile of money. I want to put it into real estate, but I don't want to do the work. Could you do the work for me? I'll give you the money. You invest it. And at the time, I knew nothing about real estate syndication. And I thought, ugh, I don't want to take your money. I don't do that kind of thing. Good luck. I'm sorry, I can't help you. But of course, I had so many of these conversations. All of a sudden, it clicked for me. And I said, wait, I think I know enough people that all have the same problem. All these people have the same problem and they don't know what to do. They're stuck. And if I could just figure out how to solve this problem for them, I can help all of these friends that I have, and I could help more people even outside of my immediate circle. And so that's when I started digging, and I discovered real estate syndication through one of my many online searches. And I realized that a real estate syndication is really just a group investment. But what got me over the hump regarding your question around motivation, because still at this time I was like, oh, how do you start a business? How do you put together an LLC and the taxes and the legal? Oh my gosh, I can't do all that. But here's what got me over that hump was I realized I had been investing in real estate for about 10 years at that time, and nobody had ever told me about syndication. And it was because people used to call it a country club investment because you had to know somebody else who had money and who was involved with these things to be able to get into it. And so it was only people who knew each other, it was the wealthy getting wealthier. And as soon as I discovered that, I said, oh no, this can't be. I've got to help get this information out there. Even if nobody ever gives me their money, nobody ever invests with me, that's okay because I need to help get the word out there to kind of level the playing field, so to speak. And so that's what got me over the hump to actually launch this business. And it's been crazy growth ever since.
And what year was that you founded
That was
Decoded?
2018.
2018. It's really interesting because in the way that you've told that story, there's sort of a few elements that jump out at me. One is that fascinating thing that happens where when we are either passionate about something or we're in our kind of zone of genius, often we are blind to the fact that there's actually skill or an edge that we have in that because it just comes naturally and we're just interested or fascinated. And it's when you were talking about, friends saying, oh, tell me more and could you do that for me? So often I think we undervalue and downplay those pieces because it's just fun or we're just interested or we just like that. And yet the the fact that you were able to combine something that you loved and were curious about and then tap it into an unmet need where it's like, oh, here's someone who has one of the critical elements, the money to invest, but doesn't have that passion or interest that I have to do that incredibly important due diligence and the work in the background and the understanding the market and merging those together. My favorite aspect of businesses is when we find that place to like create a win-win. Where do we, have that on both sides? So I love that element. The other piece that I just want to pick up on and get you to talk a little bit more to is that passion that then stirred you and you said kind of was the thing that took you over the edge to make that big leap and commitment to start the business, really around the democratising of who gets access to these kinds of investments. That is such a massive issue across the board. For a few decades now, I've been in what's now called the impact investment space. And many of these conversations have been going on of how do we democratise impact investment? How do you, the same in the worlds around angel investing or venture capital, we're always having those conversations on the investor side for those of us who are driven like you to say, if this is only available to a high net worth individual or to the country club component you spoke about, that is a massive missed opportunity. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about how is it that the work that you do and what you've chosen to focus on around the syndication really plays an important role in that broadening out and democratizing of access to investment opportunities.
When we first started in this industry, Bessie, I looked around because my background was in education. I was a teacher in game design, creating very engaging experiences. And then I was a creative director. So I had an eye for design. And I looked across this industry of real estate syndication that we were in. And what I saw was lots of very formal looking companies and websites with lots of jargon and lots of data and charts and graphs and things that I couldn't understand, even though I was really into this stuff. I would call myself a real estate nerd, but even I was looking at this, I was like, I don't understand what all this is saying. And I thought to myself, if I don't understand this, how can the everyday person who has no real estate experience, how can they decode what's going on here enough to feel confident to put their money into an investment like this? Of course, they're not going to. So I saw this huge gap and I said, from my lens, I said education. Education is the answer. It's almost like we've always talked about education as a bridge. Here you are starting out, you've got money to invest. This is where you want to go, where you're investing in your first real estate syndication. But to get from here to there, how do you do that? You have to build a bridge. And for us, education was that bridge to help people walk across and say, oh, okay, now I understand the risks. Now I understand the taxes. Now I understand how this works. I understand the process. I understand my role in it. I understand whom I need to reach out to if I have questions. That's all part of that bridge that we build for people. And so we've done it from the very beginning through a lot of education and talking about the number of times that I've written things like capital preservation, and then I stare at the screen and I'm like, delete, 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 protect your money, and just change things into words that people can understand and people can relate to. And we've always been focused on moms and women, and we know that they need to have a really good, firm grasp of something because they're busy people. And we want them to feel really comfortable, rooted in community, to feel confident to put their money into something like this. And so that education piece has always been a key part of how we've tried to reach out and democratize that information.
I love that. And I mean, when we say these things, it sounds simple. So when you talked about, starting a sentence and then going, oh, delete that,
Hmm.
put it in
Yep.
plain English. What does that look like? How would I describe that without the jargon? It sounds simple. And yet, the more we become uh, deep in our expertise or, in our own little bubble, the harder it is to tune into and realize, oh, that makes sense to me, but it doesn't to someone who is not yet, hasn't drunk the Kool-Aid or hasn't, come through the looking glass. So I'm wondering, when you think about that important role of the education piece that you spoke to, how has that worked for you when you think from a business model perspective? Whenever we have to do a lot of the education up front, it can be difficult to balance that and work out, how am I doing enough of that to build pipeline and the trust and all of the pieces you discussed, but not get stuck in then never monetizing or transitioning into actually building the components that make the business sustainable. What has that up and down journey been like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to go along with the bridge analogy, once you get close to the other side, you've got to make sure that, as you're preparing to take action, it's still an easy on-ramp. So we focused a lot on that, trying to make sure that when you get to that other side or close to the other side, we're right there to receive you. And we want to make sure that the experience is just as great getting into your first investment as it was all the way at the beginning when you didn't know anything about this world. And so I think that's a piece of it, is making that on-ramp really accessible for people, and to constantly remind people that, hey, if you want this result, this is the action you need to take. It reminds me of the story of YouTube versus Vimeo. Have you heard that story? About why YouTube has grown so exponentially versus Vimeo. And if you looked at the two platforms, it's not that that YouTube had superior technology. It's not even that the interface was necessarily better. It's not that the colors were better. In fact, there were certain elements of Vimeo's technology that were better than YouTube's.
which
But
is
the
often the
reason,
case. The best one doesn't
right,
always win. In fact,
right,
don't. Yeah.
right. But here's the one difference, the one thing that made YouTube take off. In those early days, on Vimeo's page, I think there were one or two places on the page where it asked you to share. In other words, asked you to take some sort of action to get this out in the world. And on YouTube's page, there were 9 places that they asked you to share. And so I think that's another piece of it, is constantly reminding people of the action that you want them to take to see the result that they came here for, is to continue to connect those dots, because they won't always be thinking about it. But if they're constantly reminded, then they'll say, oh, right, that's the action I need to take.
I love that. And it makes total sense that your background from that sort of teaching game design helped that be front and center as you were shifting into entrepreneurship, into building the business. Because again, it's not necessarily a given. We forget to even often spell out how someone can take that next step. Or, we assume that if they were interested, they would just ask. But that YouTube example is a good one, because it can feel embarrassing when you're in your own head, or you're the person, running the business, setting up the website. You're like, oh, I don't want to labor the point too much. And yet all of past experience, or the data, or the great writers always talk about that piece of over communicate clarity, say it again. You might be bored, but other people, it's new to them and they're going to have to hear it. Have there been any situations or stories you could share with us where you thought something was obvious and it would, work out, and you thought you had done those pieces of building the bridge, but it didn't quite resonate and you had to relearn on the fly and respond differently to those investors that you were trying to bring into the fold?
Oh, constantly. It still happens. It's happened a ton in the early days, and now it continues to happen. And we see it as a huge gift when that happens. When we talk to an investor and they tell us something that they don't understand, even if to us it seems very basic. And we're like, oh, we've written this 100 times, or we've created all these videos about it. But in that moment, what it tells us is maybe we've done it in the way we think makes sense for them. But what this investor or this person is telling us is whatever we created didn't reach them. And then it's our job to put our sleuthing hat on and go and look at what we've created, and why didn't it reach this person in the way that we intended to? Maybe there was another way that we could have communicated, or another platform we could have put it on to reach them. Maybe they just didn't see it. Maybe our website was too noisy and there was too much stuff there. They couldn't find what they were looking for. Maybe they were too busy. They needed something simpler than what we offer. So there's all this constant evolving that happens as we get more data and reflections from our investors, and as our investors are changing, and they're evolving in their own lives. What their needs are changes all the time. And so we're in constant receivership, I guess, of that information and that
And just even, I
feedback.
suppose, actively seeking it, because often you
Yes.
can just sort of go, we've engaged, that's what people want, head
Yep.
down, now we're kind of
Right.
implementing, but
Yeah.
not to see,
Or
if we go back to that.
blame the customer. That
Yes.
happens too. I've
Mm.
seen people blame, or I've been on the receiving end of this, where I call or bank or company, and I'm like, hey, I didn't find this, or I don't know how to do this. And they're like, well, it's right there. Did you find it? It's right on our website. I'm like, well, no, I don't know. I don't know, and rather
Yeah.
than taking it as a gift from their end. So we always try not to do that, not to blame the investor because they're giving us really valuable information about how we can do better to
Hmm.
serve more people like them and to serve them better.
And that approach of always being open and seeking that input, if we go back to the overarching framing around staying ahead of market trends, you can't have your finger on the pulse or anticipate or see where things are going if you do one lot of getting feedback and then build something in isolation and don't put your head up against. It is a critical part of that. I'm wondering, with yourself and Julie, your co founder, did you find or sort of intentionally see each other as having different and complementary skills? Were there things that you brought to the mix that you think have helped you get the traction that you have and grow at the speed that you have by the combination of the two of you?
100%. We would not be here today without me, and we would not be here without her. It's only through this synergy of the two of us together that we've been able to get as far and as fast as we've gotten. And I remember that very first conversation that we had, she and I instantly bonded. I mean, at these real estate events, these were the first conferences I ever went to where the line was longer outside of the men's room than the women's room. There were
That never
so few
happens.
women. I know there were so few women there. And so she and I are, of course, instantly connected because we're both women, we're both Asian women. But beyond that, we started talking about our passion in this space and our passion specifically for helping other women and moms. And so after that, we continued the conversation and we realized one day, I remember months into meeting each other, we hadn't partnered up yet, but we had met up at a cafe in San Francisco to work together, her on her business and me on my business. And we were sitting across the table and she said,
Can I
so
just jump in at
yeah,
that point? So what was
yeah,
her
yeah,
business at that point? Like, how would you have
yeah.
described what you were each doing separately?
Right. So she was doing the same thing, but under her own brand. And I had
Okay.
just started Good Egg, like, maybe a month or so before that.
Ah, okay.
And so she had been doing it on the side for I think 7 to 8 months at that point. So we sat across from each other and she said, so now that you've been doing this for a few weeks, what do you love about this? And I said, oh my gosh, Julie, I love the blog posts and the videos and creating content. I love teaching people about what this is. But if I had to take just one thing off my calendar, it would be those investor calls. I love the investors. I'm here to help the investors, but it just breaks up the flow of my day. I can't get into the creative energy that I need to write and create content. And she's looking at me across the table, and her eyes are getting bigger. And she's like, oh my gosh, I love talking to investors. I live for those investor calls. She's like, I sit in front of a computer. I watch the cursor blinking. I don't know what to type. And she's like, oh, wait, okay, so you like that, and I like this, and we're both trying to help the same people. And it was at that moment that we said, okay, well, what would this look like if we started to work together? And we still didn't get married, so to speak, at that
Yeah.
point, because a
Wise.
business
Yeah.
partnership,
Yeah.
just like a marriage, is a long-term commitment.
Mm-hmm.
So, but what really cemented it for us was one day, a separate day, several weeks later, we met up again and we decided to have what we used to call in the design world a sticky storm. So it's basically like a brainstorm, but with sticky notes. And what it allows you to do is get all your ideas out, but also more importantly, see how you work together. And so what we did was we sat down with loads of sticky notes and we said, okay, let's just set a timer for 10, 15 minutes. And we're just going to dream about all the things that we want to build through this business. And each sticky note, we put down one idea. And after the timer went off, we put them all up on the wall. And this is where the magic started to happen and where we realized that this partnership was possible. So we'd put all these sticky notes up, and then instantly we'd see, oh, this one and this one go together. That's the same idea. Great. So we saw a lot of places where we overlapped. But here's the important part. There were a lot of pieces where we didn't overlap, where she had one idea and I had a different idea, or our ideas were completely different. And in those cases, we got to work together and say and start to see some compromise or negotiation. We started to say, okay, well, I like this idea, but I wasn't thinking about doing this early on. I was thinking maybe later down the path after we already have built this other thing. Oh, yeah, that's a really great point. And it was this give and take that we started to see in this microcosm of what it could be like to create a full-blown partnership together. And so through that, we started to glimpse what it would look like to work together. And that's when we really started the partnership.
I love that, because it's also not just speaking to the presence of complementary but different skills, but also testing out how does that play? Because someone might have, bring something you don't have. And yet when it then comes down to the part of that story where you were saying, by someone raising a question or saying, in my mind, the sequence is different. I do think that's important, but it's not a priority. Probably it's 3 years away. How someone then either engages or doesn't, whether they dig their heels in, it gives you a much better sense of what that's going to look like. And for you, when you think about those areas that were shared sense around that vision, or what it was you wanted to contribute to, the issues that kind of inspired you both, maybe talk to us a little bit about, I know that one of the aspects that you have used is talking about life by design and how that plays out in your business. Can you run us through what that's looked like in the way that you and Julie have built the business, and then specifically how that plays out when you are in that mode of education and engaging with your clients and wanting for them the same pieces you want for yourselves and your families? Pull that apart for us a little bit.
I will say we are a work in progress, just like everybody else. So it's been definitely an evolution, definitely a lot of trial and error over the years. I mean, our kids were tiny when we started this business. I think my kids were 4 and 1, and I think her kids were like 6, 5, and 2, something like that.
Yeah. Okay.
And so
You were
very
in
small
it.
kids. Oh,
It's
we
a big
were
phase.
in it. I used to wake up at 4 or 5 a.m. before my kids were up, tiptoe past their room with the hopes that they wouldn't wake up, and go and work for a couple hours before they were up, and then do the whole day. And then after they were in bed at night, I would work until 12, 1 a.m. in the morning. And so
Mm.
it was
Yeah,
very intense in those early days. That was not life by design. But here's the thing is, we were so passionate, it didn't even feel like work. It felt like when I got to sit down and have that me time and work on this business, it gave me so much energy.
I understand that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so those early days, we wanted life by design for ourselves, but we knew we hadn't struck that balance yet because we were working so hard to get this business off the ground. But as we saw some traction, as we saw some results with our investments and with our investors, we started to really intentionally shape how we wanted this business to fit into our lives, how much we wanted to work, what we wanted to work on, what we wanted to hire out for, what we wanted this business to look like 5, 10 years down the road, if we wanted to hold it that long, or if we wanted to sell it before then. We thought through a lot of these things, kind of our long-term strategy as well as our kind of exit strategy, to understand where we were and where we wanted to go. And so I say it's a work in progress because it wasn't like we decided those things and we're like, yep, got it. You take this vacation. I'm going to go vacation next month. We're going to take a month off and we're going to work remote. It was all a work in progress because our team was all remote. We had to learn that. And so they're still remote to this day. We've had a lot of learnings around that. We've done team retreats to get our team together in one space. We've had lots of trial and error around taking vacations and what happens with the coverage and things like that. But at the end of the day, I think what makes it work is that we've got this life by design as our North Star. And everybody on the team, as well as all of our investors, know that that is the end goal, is to, even though if it's not perfect, to have your eyes open and to be aware that you're making these choices on some level, whether consciously or subconsciously, that are creating this life that you have. And if you want to change it, you can. It's within your power. You just have to intentionally go and make those different choices. And so I think the fact that we have that language and we have that in mind helps us to constantly evaluate as a team as well as personally if we are where we want to be.
It's interesting that you've sort of connected to those early days when you had young kids, because I think when it comes to the ideas of life by design and how we're building our businesses, the connection is very close to kids. I remember when my kids were younger, you'd have these moments where you'd almost be a bit cocky and proud of yourself and think, look at me, I've got it going on. The kids are in this great rhythm. Wonderful, it's all happening. And they were the exact moments when then there'd be a change, or someone would have a growth spurt and now they didn't sleep at this time. And now that, and that I think is just so true in all aspects of life and in all aspects of running a business, that it's more, as you framed it, the North Star, or it's the clarity of what is important to us. What are we aiming for? It's not about perfection, but it's having articulated that means that in those moments where we then go, oh, this isn't working, or this isn't how I felt it would be, we can come back to it. But it also gives that space to say there are different seasons, there are different chapters of life. And while that North Star, that endpoint may not change, what it looks like or how it plays out in this moment could be quite different. So, again, I remember phases exactly like what you described, where actually I would say to Brad, my partner, I think I'm the only person smiling on the train. And that's because for me, I loved going to work and having that, like, I'm out of the house. I can't, I needed to have something other than just being with the kids. For me, that was important. And so it was energizing, and I did obsess and got into my bubble and worked hard, but I loved it in that phase of my life. Now my energy levels are very different in the postmenopausal period to what they were then. And I have no desire to work that many hours, but it's the same whether it's the holidays, like you spoke about. I had periods when I was running organizations where I would take 10 weeks off a year because I'd take all of the school holidays. I don't need to do that now. Like it's just, I think the flexibility of that kind of framing of life by design, as you said, it opens up space and conversation, but it's also not a kind of rigid piece where it's set and therefore that's the answer. I love it. Yeah. Are there aspects that you've seen or had clients share stories with you of how some of that has rubbed off on them in really beautiful ways? Because I would imagine, given you've spoken about building that bridge and the importance of education, you've got your podcast, you write, how have you had that extra layer of satisfaction in being able to shape and influence how others are living their lives in more intentional ways?
Oh, that's my favorite part of what we get to do is the ripple effect of the impact that we get to have. When we help one person invest, it's not just helping them, it's helping their families, it's helping their communities. And we get to hear stories all the time of people who, for example, maybe they didn't feel like they had enough money to donate to a charity or a nonprofit that they cared about. But what they've done now is they've invested, and then any of the passive income that they're getting from their investment, they then give that. Or there are people who have these multiple streams of income now through these investments. And I talked to one woman who she was telling me she might get laid off. And she was worried, but she said, I don't feel as anxious as I would have several years ago when I didn't have these investments. Because now I have these investments, and at the very least, I have that income still coming in. So I might, even if I get laid off, I might not go back to work for a little while. And I thought, how great is that? That we're giving people choice and agency in the matter, that they don't feel like they have just this one avenue toward income, that now they've diversified across multiple different streams of income. And it just gives them more of that ability to just breathe when unexpected things happen to them, happen in life. And it gives them more of the ability to give back and be the people that they want to be. Because as I've learned, I used to think that money brings out the worst in people, the greed and the selfishness and all that. But what I've learned through this process is it's a beautiful thing, is that money only amplifies who you are. And so when generous people get more money, they're even more generous. When kind people get more money, they become even more kind. And the people that we attract through the brand that we've built and this messaging that we've put out, they're all amazing people. And so I love that we get to help them have more money, because I know that they're doing really great things with that money and making a really great impact in the world.
I would imagine that through sharing stories or through your book and podcast and elements, you're also able to give people some of that insight. So I agree with you about the amplification. And I think one of the pieces that's exciting to plant a seed for people is to say, you don't have to wait to a certain point of income or wealth, or till you retire, or till you sell a business to contribute. So that element of actually just encouraging people that you can start now wherever you are, there's a fractal nature to that. You would no doubt be telling people that as an investor, they can start now wherever they are and they can build up a portfolio over time. And I think the same goes for that sense of contribution, that sense of building out financial stability. It's a journey. All of these things are kind of, you'll never have a shortage, I suppose, of content for you to write in your bridge building and education, because there's
That's right.
always the next piece. Yeah. What does it realistically look like? When we touched on earlier that passion and that I share with you around the democratising of these investment opportunities, what does it typically look like when you look at your client base now? How many people would you say have genuinely come from a space where they would not have been invited to those country club investments or had visibility of deals, and are genuinely in that category of being opened up to and being able to step into this world of building out wealth and in this way?
This is a fabulous question, and I don't have the exact numbers, but my hunch is it's 80-20. I think 80% of the people we work with have never heard about this before, never would have had access to this before. And 20% of people have done it before and they've invested with other groups and they're coming to us for some diversification.
Okay.
And
And maybe
so
even
that
some of that values alignment of they like the way you do business
right.
rather than, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yes, absolutely. I think when we started in the early days, we had a real intention to help what are called non-accredited investors. So to be accredited, you have to have a certain income threshold or a net worth threshold. But we wanted to help the little guys, so to speak, the people who, maybe had never invested in anything before, maybe had never invested in real estate, never grew up around that kind of experience or knowledge. And in the early days, as you're getting your business off the ground, you have to focus on certain things, certain segments of the audience. And so in the early days, we weren't able to help some of those, as many non-accredited investors as we wanted to. But the good news is, because of the growth that we've seen and the opportunities that have opened up for us over the last couple of years, we've been able to open up what are called crowdfunding opportunities. And through those, now we've been able to lower our minimums from 50,000 to 10,000 and to open it up to anybody who wants to invest. And so talk about values alignment. It made us feel so good to finally be back in line with our original mission and vision of being able to help anybody, whether they're accredited or not.
Yeah, I love that. And it is, I mean, it's, as you said, it's a tricky piece of doing the juggle between what has to practically be put in place. You talked about those early conversations with Julie, and sequence is important, and there are elements you have to build foundations to do those pieces. But it's great to hear that that is actually playing out for you, and you're able to really begin that process, because again, it does take time, and for someone to be able to start somewhere and build up, that's exciting that they can have that opportunity.
My mom is a great example. She was one of, no surprise, one of our first investors. She's like, "Oh, honey, whatever you're doing, I'll invest in it." No, but she's a non-accredited investor. She and my dad had saved up their whole lives, and they hadn't quite made it to the million mark. They were, a few hundred thousand in savings. That's their whole life savings. And when I started this path, I thought, I can help her invest. And every, 5 to 10 years, she can double her money. And so my mom is on the verge of becoming a millionaire. And what she does, she doesn't work, she's retired. And she gets between her Social Security and now all of this investment income, she never has to work again, and it doesn't matter how much, I mean, she never has to worry about running out of her retirement savings because it's not going down, it's going up. And wouldn't it be amazing if that's the experience that everybody had in retirement, was your money continues to go up. You're not worried that you're going
Yes,
to
you're eating
outlive
into it.
your money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 And again, I just don't think you can over play the importance of democratizing that opportunity, because so often things are in place, either consciously designed that way or not. Uh, in many cases, designed to keep people out, but in a way that makes them not only technically be unavailable because of certain hurdles, but also just to use language and overcomplicate in the way that you talked about, where, on a website or things where it's there, the work has not been done to translate it and make it understandable, because there is a group of people that serves to keep it that way, so that people have to pay them to get access, And so I think broadening that out, and letting people experience that is incredibly important. When you think about, and hopefully I've got this figure correct, but when you think about the over $1.4 billion in commercial real estate investments that you've participated in, are there lessons that you could share with us that would help business leaders approach innovation and adaptation to changing markets, to changing needs from their customers or investors, that you have seen work well in your own business over these last few years to help you do that piece of staying ahead of those market trends? What can we learn from the patterns you've seen?
Where do I even start? So many lessons. As you know, as a business owner, you're learning every day. You're always pushed outside your comfort zone, and it's the joy of it, but also there's constant uncertainty and unknowns. So, gosh, I'm trying to distill down the top ones because I could talk about this for hours, all the lessons that we've learned. I would say one that is coming to mind is really staying in touch with your customer, no matter how big your organization gets and how far along with your business plan you get, but finding ways to continue to stay in touch with the person you're trying to serve. And we've created an investor avatar. Her name is Jen. She's a fictional person, but she represents the ideal person that we're seeking to serve. Um, And we run everything through the lens of Jen, and we're constantly updating Jen and who she is as we get more information from our investors about what they want and what their experience is. And so we're trying to find ways, even, if we're growing and we're running all these team meetings and doing all these partnership meetings, but we're always finding time, Julie and I, as well as everybody on the team, to connect directly with our investors, to call them, to check up on them, to email them, text them. So we have a really good pulse on what they want. And when we think we have an idea, talk about the innovation piece, because we're always thinking, okay, what if we build this? What if we did this? The first chance we get, we always say, okay, how can we build an MVP in the startup world, right? A minimum viable product. How can we build the bare bones of what that idea is and get it in front of people as quickly as possible so that we can get their feedback, figure out if this works, and so we can decide if we're going to move forward with this or if we're going to change it or nix it all together. And so things like that, staying in touch with them and constantly being in communication with them, running our ideas by them and letting them be a part of the process. I think that's another piece is I think sometimes companies feel like they have to figure it all out behind the scenes and then roll out a finished
Yeah.
product that's perfect and exactly what you wanted. But I
Oh
think
dear. A
especially
recipe
people
for spending a
who,
lot of money and being very
right?
disappointed, hey?
Yes, yes. And we've definitely made that mistake too.
Yeah.
Um, but I think people want to feel like they're part of something. They want to feel like they're part of that growth and part of that journey. So the more that you can bring them in behind the scenes and show them and give them the opportunity to weigh in, the more that they'll be engaged and the more that they'll be invested in that eventual product or offering that you roll out. So we always try to bring them along for the ride.
What are you most proud of in what you've built at Good Egg so far?
I gotta say, I'm really the most proud of the partnership between Julie and I. As you can imagine, going through over $1 billion in commercial asset acquisitions, going through, thousands and thousands of transactions with investors, hiring, letting people go, having to expand, and, the remote nature of our work and partnerships that have gone well, partnerships that have fallen apart. Through all of that, we've certainly had our ups and downs, but our partnership is the bedrock on which this company is built. And I'm so proud that the two of us have stayed so close, so respectful of each other, and served as such great mirrors for each other. I mean, spiritually and professionally, to be able to show each other our blind spots, but to also be patient with each other and to push each other to grow, to give ourselves the space. There's just been so much growth because of this partnership, and I think that's what I'm most proud of.
Yeah. And what a beautiful thing to model and demonstrate to your team and to your clients and to other business leaders by sharing that in the way that you do through, whether it's the podcast guesting or the other pieces, just sharing that story, I think demonstrates a way that you can do business differently, which is important. As we wrap up, I'm wondering whether you have any areas that you feel you're yet to crack in your business that you feel really passionately about, that you want to contribute to and make some kind of impact, but that you haven't quite made happen yet in the business?
Stop. We've done it all. We've cracked the code on
You
everything.
sorted.
Oh, yeah, we've done it all. No, of course, there's so many things we definitely want to still crack the nut on. I think one thing, we've always talked about this concept of how we care, good egg cares, we call it. And for a while, we were, once we closed a deal, we would take a portion of our proceeds and we would donate it to a nonprofit that was important to our investor community. So that felt really good. But I think there's another level even for us to contribute back to the communities where we're investing. And that's something that we're working on is within these communities. So a lot of them are apartment communities that we're investing in, right? And these are, a lot of them are workforce housing. So kind of not the luxury, but the second tier down, where these are your nurses and your teachers, that have a real opportunity to grow in their own financial wellness and their own financial freedom and growth and investing. And so we've talked a lot about, okay, how can we bring this information, talk about democratizing the information? How can we bring this to those communities who
Creating your
definitely,
next
yeah,
avatar of a different
right.
different customer
Yeah.
segment. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and helping them build wealth. And even if that means they're going to, maybe they build streams of income and they no longer want to live in this apartment community, they buy a home. Well, great. Let's celebrate that.
Mm.
And just giving more of this information and this access to help people build a better life, those people who want it. And not everybody wants to. That's
Yeah,
what I've found,
yeah.
is that the people who are listening to this podcast, the people who find us, I always say that they're seekers in some regard,
I love
because
that. Do you know what? That's one of the, in our
yeah,
business model, that's what we have
uh-huh,
named one of our customer
ah,
segments, our seekers. So there you go. Good choice of
yeah,
words.
that's
Yeah.
right, the seeker, because you have to be okay putting aside all the things that you've been taught your entire life, that you have to do this, you have to follow the rules, not stray, you invest in only these things, you put this away for retirement, and you have to be able to lift your head up above the sand and say, wait, is that really true? Or is there another way? And those are the people who look for podcasts like this, who look for investments like ours, and when they do, when they lift their head up, we want to be right there to give them that information, to meet them where they are, to help them across the bridge to get to where they want to go.
I love that. And when you take a long-term strategic view, I think what is beautiful is that you actually, without this desperate urgency to, okay, we've got to capture that market now, or what does that look like? You can actually genuinely lay out those breadcrumbs and the steps for someone that respect and are realistic about the different stages they might be in or their own constraints or realities. But when they are then ready to step into this space, you have built a brand and the trust and the relationship that the only option for them that would make any sense is to work with you. I think there's some brands like that. I'm sure you have brands that you're loyal to where there's kind of a story of that progression. One of the brands I love is based in the UK, called Trini London. And Trini used to be on a TV show back when I was a teenager. And I would watch the show. I didn't grow up with money, but I loved her things. I couldn't afford her books. I borrowed it from the library and like photocopied pages. I've still got them. Um, and there was kind of this piece of following her, then watching her when she had her own, just Facebooks, and she would just do Facebook Lives for 45 minutes, and you just felt part of her life. Now, decades later, she has a cosmetics brand and a skincare brand. I buy all of her things.
Of
It went from that
course,
piece
of
of
course. Yes.
the, I photocopied her book, which you probably shouldn't have done back then, but the, I wasn't yet her customer. She didn't yet have,
Yes.
like it's that piece of,
Yes.
I think if we take a bigger view of what a journey is that a customer is on, and then know where we add value and where we're doing some of that education or planting of seeds, but it doesn't have a distinct like monetization or a call to action now, doesn't equal failure. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
such a great way to put it. And I would tell the listener that, what Bessie is saying essentially is, even if you're putting out a message right now and you're like, oh, I didn't reach anybody, only so many people watched this thing, and I didn't get any followers, I didn't get any likes, nobody bought anything from me today, but you don't know what seeds you're planting today that could take root and turn into something amazing in, 5 years, shorter, 3 years, 10 years, you don't know. Because, like you said, you have to play the long game. And as you continue to put out more content, as long as it's got that genuine authenticity in the heart and the good intentions behind it, those right people will find you sooner or later.
And speaking of people finding you, where is the best place for people to go to learn more about your work, whether they are able to technically invest with you or not, but to learn from what you're doing? Where can people go?
Oh, I love what you did there. Very smooth
Oh,
transition.
the segue.
The best place to go is our website. It's goodegginvestments.com. We've recently also started trying to get into I'm not a social media person, but I'm trying. I'm trying my best. And so we've picked Instagram as the place to
Okay,
try to start to dip our toes in. So we're at Good Egg Investments there as well.
great. Okay,
But we
we
love
can share. We'll
anybody to
share
find
some
us.
links so people can
Great.
follow. And then also you've got your book and your podcast. So again, not everyone can people only invest with you if they are US citizen? Is it a US boundary to being able to invest?
You can actually invest if you're not based in the US, but there's a few more hurdles that you need to jump through. So you would need a US based entity, but we can help you with that.
Yeah. So if people are wanting to look at that, not based in the US, worth a conversation still. But otherwise, if we zoom out a bit, many of the aspects of what Annie and Julie are doing, I think, are great lessons for any of us as business leaders to kind of just look and learn from these elements around, innovation, adaptation. How do we watch those trends? How do we do the building of the bridge and the education that's necessary to ultimately build a business that we can be proud of and that has the strength and the financial stability that we're after, but is also contributing to things we care about. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us and letting us get a bit of a glimpse behind the scenes. We appreciate it.
Oh my goodness. So it's such a joy to be here with you and your viewers and your listeners, Bessie. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.